Hi, listeners. We are really excited to have yet another guest for the Cubicle Chimps podcast. This time we have with us Sreeram. Ram has got a fantastic background, really intriguing character. I'd really love to know more about his life journey as an entrepreneur. But a short introduction would be Ram studied at St. Joseph's, passed out as an MBA graduate in 2000. And just 6 months later, with his co-founders started Origami Creative. A few years later, in 2007, they started a branding company called Bloombox. And then Ram progressed to Flying Squirrel and Brown Apron. Flying Squirrel being a coffee brand and Brown Apron being a meat startup in 2013. In 2018, with his experience at Flying Squirrel, Ram started yet another coffee company called Maverick and Farmer. And most recently in 2020, he collaborated and fused Brown Apron into a new meat startup called Meatiness by Happy Apron. So welcome to the podcast, Ram. We are really excited to have you and look forward to this really awesome conversation about your entrepreneurial journey.
Thank you guys for having me on this very interesting podcast, specifically the name, Cubicle Chimps. In my life, I don't think I've managed to fit into that bit of a cubicle. Somehow I've managed to escape that piece in the last 21 years. And I hope to continue to stay away from a cubicle for most of my life. Thank you so much, guys. Thank you for having me on board.
Welcome to the podcast, Ram. I think what Seb forgot to mention is you are also from PSG, College of Arts and Science. We were just 3 kilometers apart and some 6 years apart, I guess.
Correct.
So, Ram, before we get started on your entrepreneurial journey, right, we thought we would hit our listeners with your coffee knowledge. Being a co-founder of Maverick and Farmer Coffee, can you explain what are the different waves we hear in coffee?
So, Raghu, that's a very interesting question that you asked about the different waves of coffee. Many people have straight away heard that there is a third wave of coffee and people are part of that wave. Although as Maverick and Farmer, we today are clearly under the belief that we are going to be, or rather, I should say, we have started creating the fourth wave of coffee. But it is good for people to understand what these three waves of coffee were before and what we think is going to be the fourth wave of coffee.
Yeah.
The first wave typically is the exchange of coffee has just started. So it's creating of the coffee and then buying in bulk, being sold unbranded as loose products in the market, which people go buy. The second wave starts when typically the brands start to come into play and they have started creating different notes, different variations in the coffee and are starting to sell what they think is the right coffee for you to drink. And that typically becomes your second wave of coffee. But it's primarily done by these big brands that are today present who are kind of controlling the coffee industry. But they're all these very, very large brands which have become very big FMCG companies. The third wave of coffee is when slowly the story of origin starts coming up very strongly into coffee. And also this whole idea of, micro lots of coffee being created, not just from at the farm level, but at a micro lot roasting level, where you start roasting smaller batches of coffee. You start saying that, okay, my coffee is coming from Koob. This is how I grow my coffee, and this is how I'm looking at selling my coffee to you. Same way, a lot of the companies in the US were talking about specific areas in Africa where they were buying, or from South America where they were buying their coffees, and then saying that this is the region specifications that are there, and therefore this is the reason why this coffee is very good. And we have kind of roasted it very different. And the fourth wave of coffee is when what we believe is when the innovation from here starts to completely take on, because you're starting to do really small batches of coffee and not worried about doing bulk production of coffee, because today you can afford to send a kilo of coffee for a discerning consumer by courier to any part of the country or even the world. And he is willing to pay a price for the effort that has gone behind creating something unique, right? So in this fourth wave, today we can afford to do extremely interesting processes to the coffee that you're growing. To give you an example, last year we created something as the cold smoked coffee. It was the world's first cold smoked coffee. Now think of the kind of experiment that is happening to make sure that one sip that you're having has such a joyous experience. The volume of work we do at the back end for making sure that one sip that you are taking will take you to a phenomenal experience, right? So when
Correct.
midday quoted us as saying the Lafroy of coffees,
Okay.
Wow.
that's when we kind of said, okay, we are probably heading in the right journey. So the journey in this fourth wave is about putting as much Maverism that you have uh,
Okay.
into the process of making coffee, so that the
Okay.
end consumer can completely have a phenomenal experience in what he's drinking. So as a
Got it.
brand in 2013 when I started Flying Squirrel, and today when 2018 when we said, okay, we want to relook at coffee as a platform itself and bring the idea of Maverism into coffee, that was our journey to make sure that India becomes a coffee destination.
Awesome. So that day when I was talking to you, when I got my that mix of coffee kit, right? I asked you for
Yeah,
1 cup of coffee, how many grams of powder should I put, right? Coffee powder,
correct.
and you said 9 grams, if I'm not wrong, right?
Yes,
So
eight
and
to nine grams is good.
great, great. And generally, right, there is a notion amongst people that coffee is very expensive when it comes from, brewers like Maverick and Coffee. Of course, there are other competitors as well. But actually, it is not. Then I did my math. One coffee only comes to 10 rupees, 9 to 10 rupees on an average. And for so much effort which goes in the back end, I think it's totally worth it. And the notion is actually kind of a myth or it's a wrong notion. Am I right?
I would completely agree with you, Raghu, and I wish there are more Raghus calculating it that way, because when you think of it, look at the price you're paying for a good bottle of whiskey or a good bottle of wine,
Yeah.
and it's the effort that goes behind it, right? Why is it that coffee alone has to be so undervalued if you're putting the right effort behind it?
Yeah, that's amazing.
So, Ram, while listening to this stages of evolution of coffee and coffee drinking from the first stage up to the fourth stage, I was thinking how analogous it is to your journey as an entrepreneur, because we were talking about your journey before the podcast began, and I felt that
Correct.
you have yourself had these few stages in your life as you have evolved as an entrepreneur. So, would it be
Correct.
possible for you to tell us a little bit about your first wave, what it was all about, and what were your major learnings from your first wave as an entrepreneur?
Sure. I always believe when you're an entrepreneur, right, there are three very important things. So one is either your idea should be fantastic, right? And if your idea is absolutely fantastic and greenfield, and therefore, you have a little bit of either effort or money backing it, the idea will become successful. Second, let's assume that your idea is not very good. You have a great amount of, you're going to put phenomenal amount of effort and a lot of money backing it for a long period of time. At some point this idea will switch. The last is you have a semi decent idea but a lot of money, and you can always with the money hire people to put the effort to do it. If these three and any two in combination will make a person successful. For me, when I started, the beauty was there was no money.
Okay.
There was a very strong idea, and because we just got out of college and we had no barriers of how advertising as an industry had to work, we would just run with what we thought our idea was good. We put tremendous amounts of our energy behind what we were doing. I clearly remember being extremely embarrassed by a customer who asked me, "What's your format of advertising?" And I have not worked in an advertising agency even for 2 days, so I had no clue and understanding of what is the format. But the fact is, we created our own format over the last 21 years of how we were working, and specifically in that 21 years, I think by the seventh, eighth year, we started figuring out, oh, this is what we needed to do. This is how the traditional world talks about it. We've been doing it, but we've been doing it slightly differently. And therefore, there was always these clients who were willing to give us a shot because they saw us doing things very different. That journey was absolutely magical. So I would say the first 7 years of running business was like, you know, every year 100% growth. You were just like growing, 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 and that journey was absolutely magical. I think I'll do anything to go back to that stage and restart, and I wouldn't do a thing different because that was just a phenomenal journey. What we did.
So, one thing to follow up on in this question, this does sound like on one side, a really difficult journey, at the same time, very rewarding. But do you remember back in those days how you defined success?
For us at that time, the joy of gaining even one small account, right? Every incremental moment was successful for us, was success for us. It didn't have a definition of saying that, okay, let's become a team of 100 people. Let's look at it from a perspective of, okay, what are the kind of accounts that you're having? Because you were so hungry at one level and you were so foolish also at another level. So, every little small incremental step was a great success for us. But there were dreams of saying that, okay, there are certain accounts that we wanted to work with. Let's look at getting that. And over a point in time, slowly, so if you look at some of the big accounts in the Bangalore market, we managed to work with most of them. And the journey and the fact was, it was all a very rewarding experience. I don't know whether at that point in time, whether we had a measure of saying this equals success. Because like I said, we were growing at almost 100% year on year. And you were just, you just said, okay, this is a happy way to be. And it just kept going. And at some level, I wonder whether, that's a much better way to think than to have these massive targets on your head.
I think you have answered the question. I think when I've spoken to many of my friends who have been entrepreneurs for a long time, they finally come to this realization, like you just mentioned, that those in the initial days when you define success by just the smallest of victories were the best best times of your life, where rather than looking at all those numbers and figures and those big accounts and big clients and things like that, those initial small victories and small successes were really rewarding. So that's what I was hoping to hear from you as well. So
can I add one thing, Seb, on that? I think my success would be the fact that the 4 people whom I started the journey with, even today are very, very good friends, and we still continue to do a lot of things in the journey of our own lives. I don't see anything more successful than that.
And see, actually, that is such is life also. A lot of times I think people who have always had an eye on their destination have been let down when they reach their destination. Because you're philosophical, I used to read a lot of philosophy myself, and I remember this one particular line from the Zen and Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. If you know about the book by Robert Persick, it's always good to travel than to have arrived. And I think journey is all that matters, and that's where you got to have all the fun. And destination is actually, I believe that it's going to be boring.
Absolutely. I think if you get a job and you're doing it really well, and I think if you can wake up in the morning and say, the people whom I'm doing it with is interesting, I think that itself is it's a big plus.
I think somebody saying, I think Raghu, the scientist, was telling memory travels at light speed. So if you go to another galaxy in 5-10 years, it'll reach you. So that's why memories are important.
Correct.
No, that's me in one zone. Okay, moving on, Ram. So every entrepreneur has certain realizations and ambitions, right? After he gets through the first phase of his journey or her journey. So how did these realizations and ambitions affect you as you moved into the second wave of your journey?
I would say my second wave was actually where I had most of my learnings, Raghu. That's more like where we had a lot of learnings, because we went. So you obviously grew to a certain scale, and then you were starting. A lot of people come to you for different things, right? And therefore you form newer partnerships. And these newer partnerships have a new set of people coming into an ecosystem that you've already created. Now that obviously is going to be constantly challenging the equilibrium you've created in your ecosystem. You're constantly worried about, am I shaking the equilibrium too much in my ecosystem, or can my ecosystem that I've created handle the volume of changes that you create? And more importantly, the people whom you bring into that ecosystem, are they the right kind of people to enhance and grow your ecosystem? If they are not, the experience is going to be terrible. It's like sleeping with the wrong person completely. It's just the worst thing you can do. And the next day morning you wake up and you say, okay, I had a one night stand, but I had it with the person I should have never had it with. But that journey can be very destructive. The partnerships that you create, you learn after you've got out of that. And I guess there is not a single person who will not go through difficulties in life. Some of the difficulties in the face of business is actually when you work with people whom you don't connect with at all. but you've made a choice because it was commercial. I think the second journey for us was a lot of just life lessons. The first journey was being flushed with what you thought was right, and whatever you did was working. And the second journey threw so many question marks at our lives. And it just kept throwing question marks one after the other, saying that, okay, you've done this, now what? Okay, you've partnered with him, now what? And is it sustaining? Is it not sustaining? Is it worthwhile? Is it not worthwhile? So
Yeah.
what is in the journey, I think at some point, business equals numbers, numbers equals reality.
Mm.
If you can equate that, right, you will be able to kind of look at the entire space and say that, okay, when I come in at 8 o'clock or 9:30 in the morning, I'm doing work. That work is going towards a certain number, and that number has many people who have to do certain roles, right?
Correct.
As long as people are contributing to the number, and again, I'm not saying that it needs to be target driven, or it needs to be towards, like I said, there is a
So
number.
from numbers, what
Number
you
need
mean is like a metric, right? Like, or
yeah,
some
it's a metric.
destination which your product is hoping to serve.
So it's actually metric. It's more
Yeah.
metric.
Yeah.
There is an optimum potential. Are you working to that potential?
Yeah.
So Ram, if I may, it sounds like you had more difficulties in the second phase of your journey than in the first phase. So if that is the
Yes.
case, how did you handle yourself, and how did you, or were you able to navigate out of those situations the better for it?
Sir, this is very interesting. See, this is where I said, right, the success for me depends on how well, the fact that even today, after 21 years, we have partners who I've been working with for the longest time, right? Way we handled it best was the fact that we would speak about our business. So there were two things that we started very early. One was a Tuesday morning, we would talk about business, and we would spend at least an hour and a half discussing business, either on breakfast, or we would, drive somewhere, just sit in the car, chat about all that we were doing. And then Wednesday nights, we would go out for a drink. And very often on Wednesday nights, we would choose not to discuss work, but ultimately, after spending 8-10 hours in a workplace, you come back and you end up talking about a few things with regard to work. The fact is, a good relationship equals to the time spent. I don't think that minuses either in your marriage nor with your relationship with your partner. I think I remember Coldplay interview, and how Coldplay was, the band members were talking about how at the initial days when they were all together, they would have great amount of fun. But the minute they were all landing in one flight, but then we're starting to go in different cars to the same hotel, and the volume of separation started increasing, the distance between them started growing. So I think that time spent that we had, Wednesday night sacrosanct meeting or this Tuesday morning meeting, where we would not just talk about work, but all other things also. And that bond of friendship that we had built over time, that's really what kept it going. You should treat that word partner in a partnership business in its absolute sincerity.
Very insightful, Ram. I think this is a great takeaway, not just for the listeners, but for Raghu and I as well. I mean, the fact that that constant communication is there, the constant interaction is there, is one of the reasons why we have also gelled well together for so long. So the only thing that I can say is, Raghu, I think we should have Wednesday night drinks over Zoom. I think it'll definitely add to the
Yeah, I'm
partnership.
bringing my herbal tea, but you know what, Ram? See, the problem with Sep and I think you have to talk about that also. What happens when you're conversing, or the time spent is too much? Nowadays, I think I'm spending too much time with Sep rather than anybody else, or anything else, right? That's also dangerous. But yeah, amazing. Good thoughts and amazing points from your journey and experience, Ram. I think it's very, very important, which we keep, reiterating in our different, podcasts as well. It's very important for anybody who starts their career or their entrepreneurial journey, or anything which they start, right? It is extremely critical on what they choose, and are they having fun is very important than, they just go at it for an output like a monthly salary, or an output like a yearly growth, or all that is, it happens any which ways, that's an output. But most importantly, whether you enjoy every day, and if you enjoy, that is all it matters. So, like Maverick and Farmer Coffee, you seem to be heading into the fourth wave of your entrepreneurial journey. What are your aspirations, Ram, and goals, if you will, as you take your initial steps during this phase?
To the world, if we can showcase that India grows coffee. More importantly, India grows coffee differently and does things with their coffee very, very differently. So if India can come onto the map of coffee as a destination that has very interesting things to do with coffee, I think then my journey is sorted. And that is the definition we've had for Maverick itself, to make India a coffee destination. See, that is journey number one. And therefore, if I then draw all my efforts towards that journey, that purpose, if I would call it, the need becomes that I have to constantly innovate with my coffee. Those are the things which we want to focus on and make sure that a customer who's having a Maverick and Farmer experience is going to have a phenomenal one. I think that's the journey.
So basically, you're taking, Maverick and or actually at a larger scale, India to the coffee map of the globe, right?
So Ram, I understand that you have had the misfortune of working with Raghu for the last few months pretty closely. So can you share with our listeners a few things that you can't stand about him?
Few things. What is this podcast is about?
Raghu, it's about characterization of Raghu. That's the podcast. I think so Raghu and me have started working from 2020. So it's not been I don't have too many bad things to comment as yet, but Raghu has promised a few things that he will send across to me. And that seems to be taking a very, very long time. So when that comes, then probably, but till then it's Raghu not keeping up his promise on delivery.
So Ram, that promise was made in Bangalore for Bangalore. Now we are sitting in Ooty, right? So with a triple lockdown.
Raghu, that's the only thing I could point out.
So Raghu, you're definitely in Ram's good graces at the moment. So I think it's important that you keep it that way, because I think this conversation is just the start of many conversations, and in future also I'll keep asking Ram this question. So Raghu, this is your warning, forewarning. Keep in his good books.
So just listeners, so you understand, this is not sponsored. Podcast is sponsored by Maverick and Farmer. We just love the coffee and the process. And if you are one of those who love your coffee, but you're not enjoying or loving the coffee you're having, go ahead, check out Maverick and Farmer coffee. I really started loving that. And of course, there are other brands which I really like. That like Third Wave also is a good coffee brand, right?
Yeah, Third Wave. When we started our cafe experience is when we were opening in Koramangala, and Third Wave also opened around the same time in Koramangala.
So before we could end the podcast, actually, Ram, if you can tell the listeners where they can find you, or anything you want to talk about the brands, or if you like the listeners to kind of experience it, you can tell that.
If we can bring Maverism into the traditional farming techniques and how we want to do interesting processing of coffee and stuff like that, I think we will be producing some really, really interesting coffees. And to try those interesting coffees, do hop into our website, which once again I'm repeating is maverickandfarmer.com. And it's a world of coffee out there. Come experience it, is my humble request.
This was a really nice conversation. We got to learn a lot about coffee, and more importantly, we got to learn a lot about your journey and your insights of having a business for so many years, or having multiple businesses for so many years. So thank you, Ram. Thank you for joining us on this journey. Thank you for the conversation, and look forward to having you back on soon to talk more about coffee and some of your other ventures as they grow.
Thank you so much, Seb and Raghu. It's been a pleasure. Just say thank you guys for actually having me. I enjoyed doing this myself. More importantly, it's a conversation, and where a 21-year journey was encapsulated in batches of importance. So it was nice. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ram.
Thank you, listeners. We'll see you next time.